was I did struggle with panic attacks during university.
And what about things like anxiety? Is that something that you feel impacts your life?
It has in the past.
Jolene, you have got a busy brain. Jolene, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So, yes, I'm excited you're doing this too. As I was saying earlier, I love your background, that you're a wellness blogger. So you definitely speak our language and we speak your language. We are aligned most definitely with how we think about things like wellness and the journey of wellness through life. So I'm really happy that you're doing this. So to get started, I first of all want to make sure that I'm understanding the goals that you have for this evaluation. And what I have here is that really, for the most part, you've had some difficulties with things like focus and concentration, but really, you want to optimize your brain.
Exactly. Focus, concentration, memory are issues. I don't think they're huge issues in my life, but I always want to optimize my brain and my health and my potential. So definitely any sort of optimization we can do, I'm all for learning about that and implementing it.
So I have here that you completed an MS in nutrition. You did very well. You're doing very well now, and you're currently in the process of working on your doctorate as well, right?
Yeah. And it actually has a basis in neuroscience, which is extra interesting that we're having this conversation too.
Wow. So there's so much you're going to be able to relate to what you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And what about things like anxiety? Is that something that you feel impacts your life?
It has in the past, and it does if I don't keep my life balanced. So being as my background is nutrition and fitness, I know exactly what I need to do with food and fitness and sleep and stress reduction. And if I allow those to become out of balance, I can definitely feel the anxiety creeping in. But for the most part, I have tools and tactics to deal with it. But it is something in the past when I was younger. That's why another reason why I got into this whole profession was I did struggle with panic attacks during university and then just the anxiety. And once I learned how to deal with it, it made all the difference.
Oh, wonderful. Good. And what about things like as a child, falling off of a fence, diving into a shallow pool, falling off a bed?
I ride horses. Well, I used to a lot as a kid. So I fell off my horse a couple times, but I don't think I hit my head.
Okay. Did you play sports?
Not team sports. I did skiing, horseback riding, golf, those types.
Were skiing? Did you ever have any crashes?
Nothing major. Oh, wait a second. I was like, no. Yeah, snowboarding. Once I was going off a jump and I kind of bashed my face into the snow when I landed. Had a bloody nose.
Ouch. Okay, so what we'll do is go ahead and turn our attention now to the scans. So most people are familiar with MRIs and CTs of the brain, and those are really looking at structures. When we do a SPECT scan, what we're looking at is how your brain is functioning. So we look at that in two separate ways. One is through blood flow, and the other is through activity patterns. So I want to go ahead and orient you first on the blood flow scan, give you an idea of what we're looking at on a sample, and then we're going to bring up yours and we're going to compare them to each other.
Okay.
So what we're looking at right now is an example of what we want to see. Okay, we're looking at your brain.
Oh my goodness.
So again, I want to just reiterate, when we see something that looks like a little hole, a little ding, a little divot, that is not a hole or a divot in your brain. That's simply showing us that this part of the brain is not receiving the amount of blood flow that we would like. It's not optimized there, and therefore a person may begin to have symptoms. Okay, so what we're looking at is called the prefrontal cortex. And we're looking at the underside of the prefrontal cortex from here. And you do have some decreased activity. As you can see, there's that little spot right there on the underside, and then also a little bit on the back as well. And this part of the brain is involved with things like attention. This is executive function. This is what you mentioned you've been having some challenges with. This is also the brakes of the brain. So this is the part of the brain that stops us before we do or say something that later we may think, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? That sort of thing.
Like emotional regulation?
Yeah, it is. It helps with emotional regulation as well. So it kind of tamps down the emotions that we may feel. There can be some really wonderful things that come out of having some decreased activity here too, because it can free people up to be more creative, be more spontaneous, be more fluid, be more of a risk taker kind of a person, and think of things from a different perspective. So really nice things can definitely come out of this part of the brain having a little bit of challenges as well. The next part of the brain that I want to show you is where I have the mouse pointed. This is called the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobes are involved in things like mood stability, temper, irritability. It's also things like memory and reading. And reading social cues is here as well. If we're having trouble here, then there can be some irritability. There can be a sense of anxiety, or there can be a sense of having a bit of a temper. And there may also be a sense of having some difficulties with some memory. And yours is minimal, just a little bit of difficulty right there. So when we see things like asymmetry or coup contra coup injury, we think, they must have perhaps had their head hit at some point. It's remarkably easy for something like this to happen. We didn't know that until we started doing all of these scans and were able to see that that was the case. And these kinds of things are cumulative. So things like horseback riding, getting bucked off of the horse or falling off of the horse, regardless of whether or not you bumped your head because of that bouncing motion, and things also like that ski accident. That's the sort of thing that would do this. Okay. So remember I told you with a SPECT scan, we're looking at the function of the brain, and we do that in two different ways. One is through looking at blood flow, which is what we just looked at. The other way is through activity levels. So that's what we're looking at now. The color gives us the information that we're looking for. It tells us the activity levels. So blue is telling us that this is idle. Red is telling us it's the top 15% activity in the brain. And then white's telling us it's the top 8% activity in the brain. And this is kind of like Goldilocks stuff. We want just the right amount of activity in certain areas. We don't want too much and we don't want too little, so that we can feel good. All right, Jolene, you have got a busy brain. So what I want you to notice is that you have some white in this area here that previously we had looked and we saw there was just a touch of red. And remember, red is the top 15% activity, white the top 8%. So it's quite a bit of activity right here. Here is a basal ganglia, and here, basal ganglia. These kind of stretch down. And then up here, what we have is your anterior cingulate gyrus. And then right back here, we do have your cerebellum. And there is a little bit of decreased activity in the internal portion. So the anterior cingulate gyrus is kind of like the brain's gear shifter. It allows us to be kind of a go with the flow person, just be kind of flexible, cooperative, see options in our lives, see when things are not quite right. If we have some increased activity here, then sometimes we can need things to be a certain way, and it can be a little upsetting if they don't go that way. And so the importance of this is that we want to make sure that not only are we making sure that we are supporting those other parts of your brain that we mentioned, but we also want to make sure that we are helping to turn your cerebellum back on as well.
So does it have anything to do with like kind of like an energy transfer where if the cerebellum is not as stimulated as much as it should be, maybe that energy or whatever we call it is going to go to different parts of the brain? Or is that not theory?
So if we have a lot of activity, and tell me if this answers your question or not, if we have a lot of activity in certain areas of the brain, such as the basal ganglia or the deep limbic system, it's drawing energy away from other parts of the brain. So, for instance, because we're in a skull, there's only so much space for us to get nutrients and energy up there to run all of the major activity that's required. So, if we have these hot spots here, then it's got to draw activity from somewhere. And so other parts of the brain are going to suffer. And that would include places like the temporal lobes, the prefrontal cortex, as we saw.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And we'll talk about solutions. The other thing that I want to go ahead and mention is a supplement that's called Brain and Memory Power. Okay, so Brain and Memory Power is another one that helps to support several different areas that we're seeing in here. And, specifically to really support things like blood flow to the entire area of our brain. And we saw on the other scan that that's important for you.
This has been excellent.
Good. Good. I'm really glad that you found it helpful. And I'm excited that you did this. I love when people come in here to optimize. That's great.
And there's always, well, you would know better, but I feel like there's always something we can improve on.
I completely agree with you. And having an open-minded nature allows us to be able to grasp onto that and then grow. So wonderful that you have that.
Great. Well, I'm so excited for my next steps.
I am too. Jolene, it was such a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you again in a month.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
You are so very welcome.